The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. We think of monsters as creatures with claws and fangs, hiding under the bed. But there was a man who knew the truth. The real monster isn't a wolf or a vampire. The real monster is the universe itself, boundless, cold, and completely indifferent to our existence. This is the story of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, a man who was afraid of the cold, afraid of the dark, afraid of the sea, afraid of strangers, afraid of life. He was a fragile, trembling recluse who lived on expired canned beans and the charity of his aunts. He died believing he was an utter failure, convinced his name would vanish the moment his heart stopped beating. Yet from the trembling mind of this terrified man came the most colossal nightmares the world has ever seen. He didn't just write horror, he rewrote our understanding of our place in the cosmos. His story begins in the shadows of Providence, Rhode Island, in 1890. The darkness was there before he was even born. It was in his blood. When Howard was just a child, his father had a nervous breakdown, hallucinating strange creatures before dying in a psychiatric hospital. This was the first seed of Lovecraft's greatest fear, the idea that sanity is just a thin shell, and beneath it lies an abyss of madness waiting to inherit you. He was raised by a mother who was both suffocatingly protective and deeply cruel. She told him he was hideous, that he shouldn't walk near others because his face would offend them. So, Howard retreated. He locked himself away from the sun. He became a creature of the night, exploring his grandfather's massive library by candlelight. He didn't play with other children. He played with ancient gods and forbidden texts. By the time he was an adult, Lovecraft had constructed a persona to hide his fragility. He dressed like a gentleman from the previous century, stiff and formal, while starving in unheated rooms. He was the gentleman beggar. He would eat cold beans straight from the can to save money for postage stamps. Why stamps? Because ink was his only connection to reality. He wrote letters, thousands of them. He built a fortress out of paper, reaching out to other writers, building a circle of friends he would rarely, if ever, meet in person. In these letters, he was confident, brilliant, and witty. In reality, he was fading away. It was this isolation that gave birth to his philosophy. Before Lovecraft, horror was personal, a ghost haunting a house, a devil seeking a soul. Lovecraft looked up at the stars and saw something far worse than hatred. He saw indifference. He realized that if the universe is infinite, then humanity is nothing. We are not the center of creation. We are accidental specks of dust on a rock, drifting through a void filled with entities so massive and ancient that seeing them would shatter the human mind. Cthulhu, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, these weren't villains. They were forces of nature. They didn't want to destroy us. They just didn't care if they stepped on us. There was a brief moment when he tried to live a normal life. He married, moved to New York City, tried to find a job, but the city crushed him. The noise, the crowds, the towering buildings, the mix of languages and cultures, it all terrified him. His xenophobia, his fear of anyone different, was the ugly, defensive shell of a man who felt the world was too large and too chaotic for him to survive. New York didn't give him a career. It gave him the setting for the city of Rillier, a nightmare geometry where nothing makes sense. He fled back to Providence, defeated. His marriage failed. His money was gone. He was alone again in the dark. And there, in the final years of his life, consumed by poverty and eventually cancer, he wrote his masterpieces. He poured his pain, his isolation, and his cosmic dread onto the page. He wrote The Call of Cthulhu, the shadow over Innsmouth, the shadow out of time, but the world wasn't listening. He sold his stories for pennies to pulp magazines that printed them on cheap, rough paper that fell apart. He saw his work as disposable trash. He famously said, "I am resigned to the fact that I am a non-entity." His death was as quiet as his life. He entered the hospital in agony, keeping a diary of his own decay, documenting the pain with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. He died in 1937, at the age of 46. He left behind no fortune, no heirs, and no fame, just a roomful of papers. But the story didn't end in that hospital room. The paper fortress he built held strong. His friends, the people he wrote those thousands of letters to, refused to let him fade. They preserved his work. They published it. And slowly, the world began to catch up to his nightmares. Today, the man who was afraid of everything has frightened everyone. His name became an adjective, Lovecraftian. The recluse who thought he was nothing is now the architect of modern horror. He showed us that the darkness isn't just in the corner of the room, it is between the stars, and it is waiting. Howard Phillips Lovecraft died alone, but he left the door open. And now, we are all looking into the abyss he found.